I don't know whether you're a naturally brave sort of person. I'm definitely not a naturally brave sort of person. I've been on a roller coaster twice in my life. The first time was when I was about 13. I went to Alton Towers and I went on a ride. It doesn't exist anymore. It's called the Black Hole, and it was all in darkness. And I decided I wasn't going on any roller coasters. And just outside the black hole, there were these spacemen that were lit up. And somebody told me, and I foolishly listened to them, that actually it was a space museum. I wasn't particularly interested in space, but it seemed a lot better than a roller coaster. So I climbed into this sort of compartment carriage. There were two people in each one, strapped myself in, and then we went in, and I was looking at these spacemen lighting up, thinking, oh, this is all right. And then suddenly all the lights went out, and the carriage went absolutely everywhere. I'm still friends with the person that was in that same carriage with me behind me, and we still laugh about it like years and years later. And the second time that I went on a roller coaster, more recently, about 5 years ago, I was at Thorpe Park. I was a teacher and we went on a school trip. And one of my other weaknesses is I care sometimes way too much what people think about me. So I'd thought, there's no way that all these people that I'm at this theme park with are going to know that I'm not brave and I hate roller coasters. So what I'm going to do is, when I go in, I'm going to look round, choose what looks like the biggest, worst roller coaster, go on it once, and then spend the rest of the day in the cafe. And that way, I'll have looked like I'm not scared, and I'll have looked like I'm braver than I am. But actually, these things terrify me. Last week, I went to Snowdonia with my brother and his family, and we went to Zip World. This is like sort of outdoor activities, high ropes thing. And we went there to go on this ride called a Forest Coaster. And Forest Coaster, again, it's a bit like a sort of little sledge thing on rails that you climb into at the bottom of the mountain, and it drags you to the top, and then it lets you go and you come on this massive, like curvy, really fast track down through the trees. It's actually quite fun. But because I don't really like stuff like that, I had decided in advance, although I don't like stuff like that, I'm not going to let anybody know that I don't like stuff like that, because I don't want them to laugh at me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go down the course as fast as I possibly can to prove to them I am brave, even when I know inside I'm not. So on this thing, there are brakes on the side of it. So I climbed into the little compartment, went up the mountain. My poor niece was in front of me in the compartment. We get to the top, and then we just absolutely zipped down the mountain, going so fast. When we got to the corners, there was such a jolt, but we just kept going until we got to the bottom. And when I got to the bottom, my brother said to me, how many times did you put the brakes on? I'm like, well, I didn't put the brakes on. I was quite pleased to be able to say that to him, because I was trying to show that I was brave, even though I'm not. And he was like, well, you just ignored all those signs that said brake. I'm like, what signs? Because I was so terrified going down, I had my eyes half closed most of the way. And then when I went down a second time, because we got 3 rides, there were signs saying brake on every corner. But I guess I just trusted that the engineer, in fact, I had this actual thought as I was going down, the engineer who designed this, even though there's lots of really heavy jolts on the corners when you're not braking, they've designed this in such a way that whatever happens, I'm not going to come off the track, however severe the jolts are as I go down. We're going to look today at a story in the Bible, an account in the Bible of 3 guys who their life was actually like a crazy roller coaster. And the jolts were terrible jolts, and the falls were incredible falls, and there were some amazing lows and some incredible highs on their journey. But they learned to trust God. So we're going to have a look at how they lived their lives and see if we can work out, how do I trust God today when life's going well, but also when life is not going well? When I get the results I think I'm going to get, and when I get the results that I never expected. When work is going well and when I can't find work, like when life has its highs and when it has its lows, how do I trust God through all of that? In about the year 605 BC, Bible historians think that was the year, there was a tyrannical king called Nebuchadnezzar. He came from like a superpower. The Babylonians, they were like the mega power of the area of the world they were in at that time. He went and laid siege to Jerusalem, to southern Israel, to a tiny country. And there were 3 guys amongst all the other people that were living in this tiny little country, southern Israel. And their names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, you might have never heard of them. fact, the chances are you have never heard of them. And they were guys for whom life had been going really quite well. I guess if they were around today, in school, they would be the sort of the top set kids who are really popular, who are on all the sports teams, who get to go to all the parties and have got places lined up at top universities. It tells us in the book of Daniel in chapter 1 that they were intelligent, that they were good looking, that they had everything going for them. And then this enemy power invades and it takes the three of them captive, partly because they were so well qualified. And they lost everything. They lost their families. They lost their hopes and their dreams for the future. They even actually lost their own names. So when we read about them later on, we read about them being called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because the power that invaded them, Nebuchadnezzar, it took everything away from them, including their identity, including their language. It carried them into captivity. So as we read about them, and we're going to jump into their story a few years after that invasion, life has been good for them. They've risen up in the country in which they were taken to become governors, to become rulers. But that's what's happened to them in their background. They know what it is to trust in God when everything isn't going in entirely the wrong direction, not just for one day, not just for a week, a month, or even a year, but just like over the long term. They lost everything. So we're going to dip into Daniel chapter 3. The words will come up on the screen. If you're following along in a Bible at home, you might notice some sentences missing. It's because we're going to read a big chunk, so I've tried to condense it down by taking a few sentences out. So this is Daniel chapter 3. So King Nebuchadnezzar, this big tyrannical king, he made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. That's massive. And set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, just in modern day Iraq today. The herald loudly proclaimed, nations and people of every language, this is what you're commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, there are some Jews whom you've set up over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you. Your Majesty, they neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you've set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I've set up? If you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your Majesty's hands. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you've set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. These 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? Certainly, your Majesty, they replied. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, the royal advisors, all the important people crowded around them, and they saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god other than their own God." This is an incredible story. It's actually incredible for lots and lots of reasons. And we're just going to draw out from this story 3 things that I think help us, encourage us, inspire us, challenge us to trust God here and now, 2,500 years after these guys at the heart of the Babylonian Empire were thrown into this blazing furnace. Why were they able to trust God, particularly when life had not been a walk in the park for them in the past? They'd been captured out of their homeland. They'd been transported off to another country. They'd had their culture, their identity, their names, their family links. All of that was broken. And yet they still trusted God. And I think the first reason why they were able to trust God was because they did it together. They trusted God together. And you see, the Christian walk, the Christian journey, the Christian life is never supposed to be done by ourselves. The story of the whole Bible is not God calling lots of individuals to follow him, although he does do that, but that he's making a whole people to follow him. And when we start following Jesus, we get to join this enormous worldwide organization. The church is not an organization, actually. It's the body of Jesus Christ. And it's not perfect, and it's not perfect because I'm not perfect. But we get to join it. And part of the way that we learn to trust God, that we learn to walk through life with its highs and its lows, but discover that the great engineer of the roller coaster has designed it in such a way that we never fall off if we trust Jesus, is because we do it together. In June, I had to find somewhere new to live, and I had a long conversation with God about the sort of place that I felt that he was telling me to live. And I saw a house, and as soon as I saw it, I thought, I'm pretty sure that's the one that God's got for me. And yet I just couldn't work out how to make it work financially, organizationally. And I had a couple of friends that were praying with me about where I should live. And as I walked away from that house, actually the house I'm in now, the house I'm speaking to you from, one of those friends consistently, day after day, when I was looking around other places, was like, "Tom, that's not the place God's got for you." And she came and stood outside this house and prayed in the street and was like, "I'm going to pray that God is going to give you that house." I actually did not have the trust that that this was the place for me. I felt it was, but then when it didn't work out, I was like, right, I'm just going to have to walk away and leave it. But it was walking with friends who loved Jesus, who could challenge me and say, "But Tom, you feel like God's spoken to you, so you've got to go after what you think God is saying." That was part of the reason why I ended up being here. Now, that's a trivial example, really, in many ways. But part of the privilege of being a Christian is that I get to have other people walking alongside me when things much more difficult than that happen, to cheer me on, to inspire me to follow Jesus with everything that I've got. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were able to trust because they did it together. Following Jesus is not something that we're designed to do by ourselves. It's something that we do together. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego weren't actually trusting God primarily to get them out of the fire. Although they know he's capable of it, you may have noticed them saying to Nebuchadnezzar, "He can get us out of this." But then they say those incredible words, "But even if he does not, we're still going to follow him. We're still going to trust him." And this decision that actually they're trusting God is deeper, more rooted, more substantial than just, "God, give me what I want." But actually it's more, God, I'm going to trust you whatever happens, because you're the great designer of this massive roller coaster ride I'm on. And even if the jolts are pretty severe, and even if the corners are pretty tight, and even if I feel like I'm going into free fall at points, I know that because of Jesus' death and resurrection, I am going to stay on the rails. Even when it seems really twisty and turny, and sometimes frightening, the great engineer of the roller coaster track, actually the maker of heaven and earth, has put me on a track, and he will not fail me, whatever happens. And I just wonder what would have happened if years before this, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were first captured and lost their families and taken to a foreign land, if they decided then, I'm not going to trust God, what would have happened in this moment? If they had decided when their names and their identities were taken away from them, that's it, I'm not trusting God anymore, what would have happened to the rest of their lives? If when they realized that the town that they lived in was going to be just swamped by Nebuchadnezzar, that so much of what they held to be important was going to be defeated, if they decided in that moment, I'm not going to trust God anymore, what would have happened to the rest of their lives? But their trust was much deeper than just, God, give me this thing I'm really praying for. Their trust was, God, I'm praying that you'll get me out of this. But actually, my trust is deeper than that. It's more profound. I trust who you are, God. I trust that you will look after me. Whatever happens, you will look after me. You won't abandon me. So we see from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that actually we do this thing together, and their trust is deeper than just their circumstances. And then finally, it's once they're in the fire, once they're in the thing that they were most terrified of, once they're in the thing that I think they probably thought God would rescue them from before they were thrown into it, that they experienced another in the fire with them. The miraculous moment where not only did the flames not burn them, but something heavenly was in the fire with them. Was it an angel? Was it the Holy Spirit? Was it Jesus? It was something heavenly, the presence of heaven in the fire with them. And I can honestly say, when I've walked through tough times in my life, much tougher than just not knowing where I'm going to live in the next month, that it's in those moments that when I look back, I can see that the presence of Jesus was with me most closely. And sometimes I felt that, and sometimes I really didn't feel it at all. And it's only when I look back that I can think, oh my goodness, you were doing something profound in me at that moment, God. And you know what? We're never promised an easy life. In fact, Jesus promises us the opposite of that. He says that following him will often make life harder, not easier. But we're also promised that the God who made heaven and earth, the creator of all things, who started the whole thing off and will be there again at the end of time, coming back in glory to judge the earth, that he says to you and to me that when we put our faith in the death and resurrection of Jesus, never will he leave us, never will he abandon us. And that's a privilege that we get. And we learn trust over a lifetime. Over a whole lifetime, we work out what it's like to trust that good, kind, never failing God. And these three guys in a fire 2,500 years ago, they show us some of what it is to trust the living God who sees you and sees me and has got a purpose and a plan for our life, whether it feels like it or not, whether it feels like our life's going crazy all over the place. He's got a purpose for you. He's got a plan for you. And we get to decide whether we're going to push into trusting that or not.